Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This edition to Insider's Guide to Energy is brought to you by Fidectis. Go to www.fidectis.com for more information.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me, as always, is co-host Johan Oberg. Johan, what's happening this week?
Hi, Chris. Great to be on again, another week. But we have to mention that between these two shows, we had the opportunity to actually meet our team face-to-face, which was quite an adventure.
Now,
and quite
you totally just took me off bait, because my Swedish friend didn't talk about the weather that went from beautiful spring to snow again. Instead, you talked about the podcast team.
This was such a much bigger, even as a Swede, and I'm pretty sure our English friend will pack into this one as well. We always talk about the weather, but listen, meeting the team for the first time after close to 2 years, I thought it was quite amazing. I love virtual, I love digital, but face-to-face once in a while, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, so you got a fair amount of likes on the post. For folks that don't know, look on LinkedIn, and Johan, you'll see part of the team. I don't even think that's quite half the team, but we did get the Zurich contingent out, and one of our producers, Luca from Bern. It was a fantastic time to get everyone out. We had a great time, had some chicken wings, had some beers. It was a great night out. It was a lot of fun for the team to see each other.
That was great. And just imagine what we've been able to do without ever meeting the team. I think it sends a little bit of a signal. Food was great as well. But talking about the weather, yes, what happened? Cold again. Not a big fan of this one. Hope for the weather come back.
Well, I think what I'm looking forward to tonight is talking about what our guest does. Entrepreneur, he's been in the business, he's been growing business. You want to hear about that, gone through funding, gone through all the things you need to do to grow a tech company in the energy space. I'm looking forward to hear about, how do you create a marketplace? How do you solve some problems? I'm interested in what they've done there as well. So for me, I think tonight is a pretty wide open slate to figure out where it's at. When it comes to the technology, I think that falls close to home for me. But I'm just excited to have the conversation.
No, likewise. And I think this is right up the alley where the show is all about, isn't it? Where we talked about renewables, touching on the weather, of course, because it's extremely weather driven, but also the digital. This transformation is equally as much digital. And how do you use software in order to maintain this energy transformation? And this is what I'm really looking forward to hear a little bit more about. And how do you actually create a business model around this, which can scale? My business sense always comes around.
Well, I have no idea how they did it. I think they've been around since about 2013, so I assume they've got some sort of business model because they're still here.
Well, for sure.
I assume they're still growing, but let's find out. Peter Bance, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
So as you can tell, we're not exactly sure where the conversation is going to go, but I think, as I say every week, I've got the unfair advantage. I know you're from Origami, and I know a little bit about you, but our audience has no idea who we've brought on board tonight. So maybe we should start with a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, no problem. So as you can probably tell by my slightly annoying Canadian accent, I grew up on the east coast of Canada, surrounded by nature, beautiful pine trees, birch trees. I went hiking, I was an outdoorsy kind of guy. And that sort of is one of the reasons why I've become an entrepreneur in the kind of sustainability renewable space, is I really do believe nature is important to look after, right? But what brought me over to Europe, UK specifically, is where I've lived for the last 25 years, is a career in technology, specifically turning technology into businesses, right? So when I did my PhD in physics at Oxford, it cured me of academia forever, but technology stayed in the blood. So I then switched gears into a commercial career track for the last 20, 25 years, building really market relevant piece of technology and then taking them to market at scale. So really that's me, a Canadian by upbringing, an environmentalist by passion, but a technologist, kind of business guy by career.
And so maybe it would be worth telling our audience what your current role is in your current your current venture is.
Yeah, so my pleasure. So I'm the founder and CEO of a technology company called Origami. So we don't sit around all day folding paper with our hands like the ancient Japanese art of kind of origami, but we do fold energy shapes with software. So that's where the kind of the name comes from. So when I founded the business, I was actually working kind of part-time in between CEO gigs at Octopus Investments. It was a big London-based investor in venture capital, sort of digital startups on the one hand, but also green energy infrastructure, things like big solar farms and wind farms, stuff you could kick. And surprisingly, nothing in the overlap between the kind of digital venture capital investing and the big kind of asset-backed renewable investing. And I thought, aha, there's an opportunity here. So while I was doing that, I was working out the business plan for what became Origami. So when I founded the business, which was basically to become the digital glue between the physics of energy assets and the economics of markets, I then left and said see you never. And they said, oh whoa, before you leave, pitch us the deal. So I pitched them the deal, and I guess their investment instincts got the better of them. So they actually bankrolled the company to get going and off the ground. So when I left, they gave me a big check. So it's a nice way to leave any businesses with a check in your pocket.
So how long ago was that? I think I mentioned 2013. I think I've seen some things of you talking in the past and speaking. Tell us about the journey. Where are you guys at now, and what's happened?
Sure. So the
You
early
started with a
days.
check. So you quit your job. You told the boss to leave, and you left. They gave you money. What happened next?
So yeah, it was the kind of classic startup, literally in the study kind of bedroom. There wasn't much reality to the venture to start with. I had a skeleton crew of part timers, which I'd hired myself with my own money. I had 3 signed letters of intent with customers saying, if you build this software product, we will use it. But at the time, I had nothing. I had no product built. So I had those kind of signed letters of intent for a future truth that I was going to build. I had a bunch of part-time, helpers trying to get the venture off the ground, and also I'd kind of called in some favors from a group of really experienced people. One from the world of government, one from the world of finance, one technologist, and we kind of built an advisory board. And those 3 ingredients were, I guess, enough to get the venture funded. So really, in the early days, it was using that seed funding to build a team, build the beginnings of an early product, and actually start getting in the hands of customers. And fast forward a few years now, like many entrepreneurs, you're trying to get that product market fit. Am I building something that the market really needs, and what's that pain point that's really going to light the market up? And that's the kind of journey through the fog that I guess we've been doing. And now we've landed at the point where we're signing multi-year software as a service contracts, worth millions. So it feels like we're now, at first base, ready to, swing for the fences, to use a baseball analogy. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of what we've accomplished over the last few years. And I think the external green energy markets changed in a transformational way in the last few years too, as we all know. So it feels like the timing is now about right to doing what we're doing.
All right, so I got the fact that you kind of got stuff going. You got the board and all this stuff together. What was the genius idea that you woke up with that you decided to get some engineers and folks to go do? What was the problem statement? So you said we're kind of the digital world meets the physical world, or whatever. You're the market and you need this kind of digital glue. That's a pretty opaque statement, I guess. I don't really know what that means. So help me understand what the problem statement you solve is.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think it was partly a recognition that, in the past, the world of physical energy, lived over here somewhere, right? It was assets you could build and finance, and there's, messy physical realities like grid connections and EPC contractors and all this kind of stuff. And then quite separately, route to market providers, trading the capacity or the energy, et cetera. And over here, you had the kind of financial world of, trading and hedging and, making money. And in fact, the physical world of assets, the financial world of trading and monetization, and the contractual world of customers and contracts, they almost spoke a different language, right? A bit like in the early days of computing and the internet, the packets of information needed to be translated into some sort of common language, a bit like, HTML for energy. So really one of the aha moments was the need to process and then orchestrate these quite different streams of data, physical data, financial data, contractual data, into something which made sense. It was more kind of interoperable. So that was one of the early light bulb moments, is that these historically quite separate worlds of physical, financial, contractual needed to be brought together, partly because the markets were reflecting that the physical world of weather and renewables were beginning to really impact the financial world of prices and exchanges and traded commodities. So these historically separate worlds were actually now had a strong interplay. So therefore the data, the tech that's going to bring this stuff together was suddenly going to become valuable, hence create a business to bring that stuff together.
So you're sitting there in your old job, waking up with this brilliant idea that there's a gap here somewhere. But there's a big step of moving from a technology idea to actually then testing it on customers. So were there customers involved in the beginning, or was this just a leap of faith? Let's get the money and let's start trying it on customers? Because usually I think there is, if you do something, you bring a customer, you steal a customer, or you work with a customer. So how did that interaction work? Did you have that, or did you just jump on the technology and think this will work?
Yeah, a bit of both. I guess most entrepreneurs that I know, they have a combination of sort of blind faith in their idea, based in some sort of really visceral vision of how they think the world should be, and then anchored in reality of what customers, users are willing to pay for in the here and now. And that may be a small step along the way to a bolder vision of how the world is going to look pretty different in a few years' time. So I guess that was true of me too, is I did have a vision of where I think, the world is going to be quite different, but you need to get there. So the early reality was building a small subset, a couple of Lego bricks in what will become a really, sophisticated set of digital Lego over time, and get those early beginnings used in the hands of real customers and start earning a bit of real money, and also build the muscle fiber, a bit like any athlete. You gotta start jogging before you run, before you sprint. So I think learning how to build and sell and deploy software solutions for customers again and again, start small, do some pilots with some early customers. And the choice of those early customers is absolutely essential for any entrepreneurial journey. And you need some that are willing to kind of take a bit of a leap of faith, or maybe it's less of a leap of faith, but go on a journey, right? They realize that a small beginning in the right direction can eventually be a transformative change to their business. And really that's what we were lucky enough to do, is start working with a couple of those early customers that recognized they needed to go on what became a transformational journey in terms of how those digital tools will help them make money from assets or trade better, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think that's what every successful startup needs to become a scale up and a real growth company, is some of those early customers that are willing to go on that journey.
So out of curiosity then, who are the early ones? What kind of customers did you attract, and who were willing to go on this journey? A little bit of leap of faith together with you, because I guess it's also a leap of faith of the customer.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's got to work both ways, right? So I guess if you had to kind of distill down the two basic types of customers, and this is all in the green energy space, right? So everything we do is to accelerate the shift towards a green energy world. That's our entire purpose, right? That's hopefully most people's purpose now in the energy sector, is to shift from brown to green, right? Otherwise, what are we doing? So all of our customers, bar none, are committed, genuinely committed to the kind of green energy transition. So I kind of take that as a given. But then within that space, we're seeing two big kind of groups of businesses. One more centered around assets, project development, raising capital, building out stuff. And then another group of businesses that are more sort of in the markets. They're trading, they're providing PPAs, they're making markets, they're buying and selling, right? They're in the flow of money. So partly the physics of assets and part of the economics of markets, but actually they're blending together. Some project developers owning and operating assets like batteries, as well as solar and renewables, they're starting to monetize some of their own revenue streams in the stack themselves, and they're starting to become technology users in their own right, not just offloading everything to a a route to market provider or someone providing them a PPA. And similarly, on the other side, some of those early adopters that recognized they needed to transform their journey were more, market makers, traders, PPA providers to renewables, and then to batteries, and then to, EVs and so forth, is because they realized that the world of market experience in trading and, Excel spreadsheets, no longer cuts it. You're being overwhelmed by a sea of data, and also the way you make money is going from long term to more and more and more real time. So the fast and furious avalanche of data, surging volatility, all that stuff meant you needed a powerful real time digital solution to survive. So those are the two broad groups of businesses that we see are kind of latching on to this digital transformation the most, is those building out assets that need more and more real-time visualization, control, optimization, that kind of stuff. And the second, more in markets, being overwhelmed by a sea of data or surging volatility. They need to make real-time decisions on real-time movements in markets.
And so is this taking place now? What you're describing, is that a reality today? Are people making, kind of like trading went through this, right? So we went to automated trading, and the machines start doing more and more. Are the machines making these decisions, or are the old school folks still wanting to be, do they still want to have a controller, a knob to change something?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say there's still a spectrum. I think most businesses still want some sort of human in the loop. A bit like when you're flying an airplane, most passengers take some comfort that there's still a pilot in the cockpit. They may have an increasingly sophisticated autopilot that's helping them fly the plane, but ultimately there's some important judgments to be made by people. I think that's the sort of the transition we're seeing at the moment, which is a lot of businesses in this energy transition are going to want to access more and more powerful digital tools to do some of the work for them, but not necessarily all of it. So yeah, I think that's an important trend we're seeing, especially when you're trying to cope with tons more data from these physical and financial sources. And I think the pace of decision making is going from doing some analysis, and that might take you a week with some data lake, into a day or an hour or a minute. The pace of actions having to accelerate dramatically. So it's partly the amount of data, and partly the speed of decision making means that over time more and more automation is becoming part of those digital tools, but there's still, in most cases, a person in the loop.
Okay, so you said earlier that hopefully you're focused on green. And it sounded like you're thinking you're accelerating or helping the process. Maybe you give a more tangible case story or a real world. So once again, I kind of get everything you're talking about. They're really broad brushstrokes. So maybe take me through a use case or something where you've made a difference, where you've accelerated someone doing something green, or where you think you're accelerating the industry. That would be interesting to me.
Yeah, so I guess one of the flavors of the month that we're seeing a lot of at the moment in the press is around energy storage, right? So if you look at the shift to green energy systems, renewables, powering increasingly electrified usage of energy, ultimately things like mobility and heating and cooling is all going to go electric, powered by renewables, right? That's a vision of the world which a lot of people believe in. But if you've got a renewables-based power system, you've got to have more and more physical flexibility to manage some of that inherent volatility. So things like batteries or other forms of longer-term energy storage are going to become really important to balance the system physically, to keep grid systems stable physically, but also to manage financial volatility in traded markets. So the physical volatility, the financial volatility, you're going to need energy storage in the system somewhere to kind of make sense of all of that and to soak it up. So what we're doing with a number of our customers is basically putting a layer of software over top of things like batteries that then connects them to potentially different route to market providers that can be switched out every year, every month, maybe even in the future every day, right? So the ability to have a consistent layer of technology over the life of a project. So we've signed, for example, our first ever 20-year software as a service deal with a customer, where the long-term certainty they're looking for was not on the commercialization, the route to market, but was on the layer of software which let them consistently monitor what the assets are doing, make sure they could handle all those real-time flows of data, make informed decisions about how those things are being monetized across different value pools. Some of them looked like grid-based ancillary services. Some of them looked more like day ahead or within day trading in wholesale markets. Some of them were things like the balancing mechanism. So hopping between different pools of value, but with a consistent view of what does the data showing you, what decisions do you need to be taking, and how do you plug in to those value pools using potentially different route to market providers across the portfolio. So that's the kind of deal that we're now striking, is long-term multi-year software as a service deals on flexible assets like batteries, quite often as part of mixed portfolios, batteries with renewables, batteries co-located with solar, co-located with wind, or even managed as part of gas peakers that are doing very short-run flexibility for a wind lull in the middle of the winter, that kind of thing. So flexible monetization of assets with a consistent multi-year layer of software to handle the data, and then form standardized interfaces to different route to market providers. That's the kind of deployment we're now doing these days as one kind of tangible use case.
So you mentioned that this is like Lego bricks. So assuming that that's the 5,000 piece Lego, how many bricks are we right now? Are we like 200, or where are we in that scenario?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, even as a technologist, right, I can get a bit too excited around, the importance of technology and ignore the reality that different markets, different asset classes, different geographies, different regulatory environments are genuinely different, right? So I think what the modern version of technology for green energy looks like is at some sort of foundational level, right? Really in the core plumbing, you can build stuff which is truly standardized, identical bits of Lego, which you can then start configuring in solutions that look more bespoke to either a particular customer or a particular geography or a particular regulatory environment or a particular grid topology, whatever the reality is, right? So absolutely standardized foundations with then highly configurable sort of applications built on top of the platform. So I guess that's the analogy. I think that the whole industry is going to go more towards foundational levels of technology which are good at reading data streams or building forecasts or looking at comparing like with unlike data, that kind of stuff. And then an application layer which is more directly linked to specific customers or specific markets or specific geographic territories, which need to accommodate the reality on the ground, which might be quite different customer by customer, country by country, market by market. So in that way, you can separate what looks like quite a customized, configurable application layer with a brutally standardized, truly global tech platform at the more foundational level.
So you basically built the OSI model for energy, basically, is what you're doing.
Kind of, exactly. So the art there is to build enough standard Lego. So if you imagine like a kitchen or a chef, they have a set of standard ingredients, but depending who comes into the restaurant, they want a specific meal, and you can cook that specific meal using your standard ingredients in the kitchen. So yeah, these highly configurable software components like containers, and you can click those containers together in a way which delivers a solution which a particular situation demands.
So the benefit, obviously, of having software is scale, and also geographically. Being Canadian, running the UK market, I would assume you started off testing a little bit on the UK market. But where are you today in terms of where do you see the markets for this? We see a number of trades going up everywhere, of course. We see more and more flexibility. We see batteries. We had a lot of them on the show. We see new PPAs flying up all over Europe now with wind and solar. So where do you see, I guess, UK, and where are you now, and where do you see the next kind of growing markets?
Yeah, so the UK is actually quite a sensible, quite an exciting place to start a business like mine. But a lot of the regulatory liberalization that happened in the late 90s, allowing cool new commercial models, some based on technology, some based on financial engineering, some based on new physical assets, to really let rip, right? So the UK is one of the leading countries in the world that's allowed this type of technology-based commercial innovation to flourish. And I think it's fair to say there's still a shakedown that's yet to happen in terms of chucking stuff on the wall and see what sticks. But it's a great place to get going, because you can try stuff. And actually, because it's an island and there's quite an open market and different pools of value, you can actually build commercially viable business models that people are willing to buy for hardcore commercial reasons, not some sort of regulatory mandation or based on a subsidy. It's just the real world of merchant risk and stuff. So the UK is a great place to start that kind of stuff. And if you look around the world, driven sometimes by constraints like on the east coast of the US, or a regulatory model which is beginning to copy the UK, a bit like in Asia. Japan is following a model, but many years later, or in Australia, raging volatility and a lot more build out of renewables. So you see pockets of the world which are beginning to really be driven by similar forces that the UK has kind of pioneered in some way. So it's no accident that I think most of our deployments as a business are in the UK to begin with, but with the UK subsidiaries of global giants. So a lot of our customers are truly global enterprises operating in countries all around the world, but they're using the UK as a bit of a test bed. Let's see it work here, and then take it to the northeast of the US, or ERCOT in Texas. Let's take it to Australia. Let's take it to Japan. Let's take it to Central Europe and Germany and the DACH region. So there are these logical expansion markets which are driven by maybe subtly different forces, but opening up in terms of allowing the commercial innovation, the deployment of renewables, and the kind of the grid constraints, the merchant risk and the volatility, and the electrification of things like EVs and heating and cooling are all beginning to create the same sort of forces around the world. So digital solutions to these green energy opportunities or problems, depending on how you look on the different sides of the coin, it's beginning to be a global truth, right? But the UK is a great starting point.
So you talked about all these different disparate devices and parts of markets and things not speaking the same language. And to me, the language almost seems like it should be standard. It shouldn't be a Origami or someone else. It should be industry wide. These are the interfaces we use, right? Whether it's Internet of Things talking, whether it's the conventional devices, whether it's an interface that we do to get to the financial markets, which then lends the question is, okay, so you've signed a 20-year agreement to be kind of this middle layer, assuming that you're that language. So is there a standards effort going to do what you're going to do? And then the question is why isn't it Google or Amazon or something like that I expect to be doing what you're doing, because they're really good with big data and things like that. So I'd expect them to be competing in your space once there's a standard way to talk to all these devices. Is that logical thinking, or is that just way off the base from where we're going here?
No, I think I agree with part of what you said, right? So I think if you look at specific aspects of industrializing interfaces, data formats, communications, languages, all that kind of stuff, I think you see the beginnings of some of that standardization in pockets of this green energy transition. So a couple of really exciting ones that by the way, our platform talks to. One is in the guts of assets. So if you've got tons of solar farms and wind farms spewing out electricity via SCADA systems on the ground, and how do you read all those meters, those generation meters? So actually, there are now beginning to be some businesses at getting to really quite large scale, providing data ingestion systems, and then a platform where a company like us, we can tap a pretty standardized API and read real-time streams of data from gigawatts and gigawatts of solar farms and wind farms without us having to go directly to each and every site. So that's just wonderful, right? So it's beginning to be scaled and industrialized, how you read data from thousands and ultimately millions of renewable generation sites, for example. On the other side, you're beginning to have more standardized interfaces to traded exchanges, different traded products on different timescales at different prices. Again, you can begin to have clear APIs in that world. So a bit like, I don't know, a plumber that shows up at your house trying to install some fancy new heat pump or heating system, they're going to have some basic connectors in their toolbox. So some of those connectors to SCADA systems at scale or to exchanges, we're going to build a library of those increasingly standardized connectors. But the solution that the customer needs that brings those things together is kind of why a business like ours exists, right? So I think those individual connectors are going to become increasingly standardized, and thank goodness for that, because a new company trying to build all that stuff from scratch, I mean, that would be insane, right? So we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in many ways. Individual businesses starting to scale up quite successfully elements of that kind of green energy transition is awesome, because then we can tap an increasingly efficient set of third-party APIs to build our solution for our customers, and that's exactly what we're doing.
So the technology, I'm starting to get a head around. Probably Chris has already noted it down, so I think he's fine with it. But if we then turn around, obviously we got the software part of this one. We're looking at maybe an ARR model or something. But the advantage of software as a service is obviously that you have a start, and you add on number of tools, number of customer solutions, be that bespoke or not. But the whole idea of getting recurrent revenue. So how do you make the money? Where do you sit in terms of this?
So it's a great question. And you're right that, I mean, certainly, we haven't pioneered the SaaS model, right? Tech companies for the last 5-10 years have been shifting from, one-off CapEx purchases of software hosted on-prem and with a server in a cupboard somewhere, through to, cloud hosting, software as a service, right? So we're standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of that pricing model, that deployment model, that hosting model. But the really big difference here, and I think the way that we kind of built a growth model around SaaS for clean energy, is that there's at least two, and over time more, growth dimensions. So to pick two simple ones, right? And this follows a land and expand deployment with customers, is quite often a business would want to start using software as a service in quite a small way. So let's pick a fairly narrow use case. Maybe they'll pick a tiny subset of their portfolio. Maybe so physically they might put one or two assets on the platform. One 10 megawatt battery, or one 50 megawatt battery, or one small solar farm, or whatever. And they might only then use one or two of those software Lego bricks, not the entire stack. So the initial deployment, the land bit of land and expand, could be a tiny number of assets, a small percentage of the whole portfolio, and one or two bits of software modules, including the whole stack. And then that gives you a small amount of recurring revenue. And you might do that as a pilot, maybe for 6 months or a year or something. And then they get comfortable with that. Okay, great. I trust what you do. I can see how it's going to make more and more money for me as I do two things. One is put more and more of my portfolio onto your platform, so more volume. And then secondly, you go from the bronze to the silver to the gold version of the software. In other words, more and more modules, more and more functionality, more and more value add. And really, those are the two big dimensions that we grow our business, and they drive greater ARR. So more megawatts and more pounds per megawatt, I guess, would be one crude way of describing the way you can grow the value of what you're doing in software terms, is you start onboarding more and more of the customer's portfolio onto your software platform, and you end up upgrading the solution every month, every year that goes by, to become increasingly powerful, and you can create more value for them. So hence you get paid more for doing it. So those are basically the two big dimensions of growth for a SaaS-based ARR kind of revenue model like ours.
So what have you learned along the way? So you've been doing this for a little ways. The conversation tonight is probably different than some of the early YouTube videos I've seen of you speaking, and maybe getting your generator to make your money for your company or something like that, where it's sitting there. So this seems to be a bit broader than the early vision. And as a founder myself, I know we pivot and grow and do things as we go. We never actually deliver what we thought we were going to deliver, I think, in the very first incarnation. At least that's been my experience along the way. So what have you learned?
Yeah, so I think like most entrepreneurs, I like to believe that the original vision that I had for when I founded the company is still exactly the same, but the way you actually execute on that has changed probably 4 or 5 times along the way, right? And I think that's actually true. So the original vision that you need this kind of digital glue between the physical and the kind of financial world of energy is absolutely what we're doing. But what we've learned along the way is, what exactly is that product? Well, we've reinvented that a few times. How are you actually going to offer it to your customers? Again, we've evolved that. And our energy business is willing to take, from zero to an all-in bet. Well, no, they're not. They want to do it in some sort of phased way. So I think whether it's the go-to-market strategy, that's probably pivoted 2 or 3 times. The product incarnation, the pricing model, we've changed all of those 2 or 3 times along the journey. But the original vision is exactly the same as it was when I founded the company back in my proverbial bedroom. And I think a lot of businesses do that kind of thing. The North Star that creates this kind of galvanizing force for everybody, including our customers and others and investors, backers that we've had. We've raised 50 million pounds as a company, and we're probably going to raise a lot more. Those original investors took a bet that we'll figure it out, right? That we didn't have a crystal ball that was perfect, far from it. I think the one thing that we knew is that the energy sector, and therefore our digital solution, was going to have to need to evolve and evolve and evolve, as it has. But they believe that we're going to figure it out along the way. And that's what a lot of the early customers did too, is they realized that they're going to go through this digital transformation. So it's a bit of a journey too. So yeah, I guess in hindsight, the vision is the same as it always was, but the product definition, the pricing model, the go-to-market, we've pivoted probably 3 or 4 times along the journey.
Yeah, and I would expect that, right? So that was just curious what you learned. The other question I have is, who is your customer? So I get the companies that buy it, but the kind of the vision and the things that you're talking about, who do you call? Who are you talking to? Is what is it is there a futurist at the company? Is there who's dealing with you? Who's making this decision? Because it's probably not one that's already in place, because you seem to be the complex sale, because you've got financial people, you've got people in operations, you've got probably a lot of people that could say no along the way.
Yeah, you're right. Like every kind of B2B, tech sell, especially a level of the enterprise, it needs to have a couple of key people to say yes, and you need to avoid several people who are going to say no, right? Or convince a begrudging, person that actually they see the value in what we're doing. So quite often, especially in this kind of early adopter, kind of innovator uptake of any curve, you do rely on 1 or 2 real champions in the business. And quite often it's the CEO of the whole company. Is they understand that they need to go through a transformation themselves as a business, and that technology is going to be one of the keys to unlock the castle, right? So usually it's the CEO is a real believer. So he or she understands that they've got a good business today, but it's going to need to go through a transformational journey. Quite often there's some sort of technology advocate, maybe it's the CTO or the CIO. They get that data is the new oil, right? They really understand that the ones and zeros are really going to be the source of a lot of the enduring value. But then you've got a whole bunch of people that quite often would say no, or they kind of begrudgingly, I think we can eke it out a bit more. Why, rock the boat? So someone in operations, someone in trading, someone in asset management, those are sometimes the people that you need to convince. Hence the need to do pilot deployments, or let's do an initial phase deployment with you. Let's show you what we can do, right? To kind of get them to become advocates as opposed to naysayers. So yeah, usually it's a real champion at the top, CEO, CIO, CTO, someone like that, maybe head of strategy. They get the fact that they're going to have to go through a transformation. And then in the engine room, in operations, in asset management, in trading, you're really going to have to get the buy-in, the belief, and just show them that this helps their world. They can make more money. They can avoid a lot of operational pain. You can make their problems go away. That's where you need to win the hearts and minds.
So in terms of a B2B model, obviously we all been in the B2B. I worked in B2B for the last, my whole life, in terms of finding the right people, which is always the big challenge. Everyone wants the CEO meetings, and that's not always the easiest one. So you have something to wave them with. But that also creates a little bit of a positive challenge in terms of growth, because we mentioned not geographically growth, but also in terms of, okay, so how do you take business growth in terms of a software? The technology is one thing, but what would you say are the biggest challenges from where you are, maybe from the start to now, but maybe even further? You said bringing on more money, but where would you invest it in? Where do you see the big gaps in terms of scaling this business now, in terms of winning the deals, getting into the right people, exploring the technology? Where do you see that is?
Yeah, so I guess the challenges are always usually around build what the market needs, and sell it via the right channels and have the right team, critically, the right talent base to do both those things. So get the product right and get the go-to-market right. Those are the absolute essence of our business. So we're spending millions on building out more and more functionality in the software layer. So that spend will never stop, because in a sense, that's what all B2B tech companies do, is they promise, I can deploy something that's worth something to you today, and it's going to get better every day, every week, every month, every year that goes by. It's going to get better and better and better. So investing shareholder capital into a software product that's just going to get more and more powerful over the years to come, that is one core kind of enabler of growth in our B2B tech company, right? The second is getting your go-to-market right. And sometimes you sell direct, find that evangelical, a champion at the top, the CEO who really believes in it. Or also what we're finding now, and this is, I think, a really important trend that the whole market's going through, is that the wall of money that's funding the green energy transition, probably $100 trillion is going to be spent between now and 2050 to green the entire planet, right? That's an enormous deployment of capital. So the wall of money is beginning to be a sales channel in and of its own right, actually. So befriending a bunch of those infrastructure funds, deploying money into things like solar farms or EV networks or batteries, they're not going to be the customer necessarily, but they're going to whisper softly into the ear of the business they just gave $100 million to invest in a fleet of batteries. They're going to say, hey, don't you need software to intelligently monitor and dispatch and optimize the value from this stuff? So actually, those indirect sales channels are another important thing to get right as we grow. So looking at the indirect sales channel, that go-to-market, is really important. I'd say also the SIs, the systems integrators, those tech companies doing bespoke elements of software deployment, they may become a channel in their own right as well to kind of stimulate sales uptake. And I guess the last one would be, there are a lot of consultancies out there that are advising the boards of energy businesses on their own transformation. And quite often the recommendation is you need some tech so to go through this transformation. So build great product, get your go-to-market sorted out. I guess those would be the two key areas that we stay awake at night worrying about. The talent to make that stuff happen. And then in terms of the product, make sure that you make the right investments at the product at the right time. And in terms of the go-to-market, is don't just think about the obvious way of landing the customer, but the indirect way, via the investor, via the consultancy, via the systems integrator. That's quite often the indirect sales channels to grow the business.
So I think we've done a really good job for folks that want to get in the startup business or understand how a tech company gets built up. What are the skills that are making you uniquely energy, right? So you kind of peripherally, we've talked about some of the energy problems. What specifically, if you're looking for an employee, or I think your VP of sales came from an ETRM background and Trayport and some of these other big software companies, what are you looking for, and what kind of knowledge and industry knowledge do you need to be successful? Because it's not just about building. There's a lot of techies that don't solve the problem. So where's that mix, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so you're right. I think any kind of tech company trying to get into or transform the energy space needs a combination of deep domain knowledge. You actually do need to understand how energy works. What is a megawatt? What's a megawatt hour? How do you trade power? What's a PPA? You need the basics, and probably 20-30% of your people need to actually really understand that domain. Otherwise, they're going to struggle with the basics. And also, you're not going to be credible, probably, in the eyes of your customer. But actually, a significant chunk, maybe even the majority of the company, needs to almost be blissfully ignorant of those realities, because you're going to try and build some foundational bits of Lego, which are super scalable, super secure, design in cyber from day one, et cetera. And you may not have those instincts if you come from an energy background, because energy up until fairly recently wasn't digitized, right? The software wasn't even a thing. So I think you do need a big chunk of your people who are willing to kind of build stuff in the way that is right for way the future of the industry is going to be, not the way it was 5-10 years ago, right? Which was pretty low tech, let's be honest. So I think, maybe it's a 2/3, 1/3 thing, but a decent third who have deep domain knowledge, understand the pain point of the customer, the realities of making money in energy, and what physical assets or trades look like. But then probably a majority of your business, which really brings, our digital natives. They really understand instinctively how you do agile software development, how you build in cybersecurity from day one, how you think about scalability, all that kind of stuff has got to be in their DNA. And they're probably not going to come from the world of energy, because basically the energy sector hasn't been through this global digital transformation yet. So you're unlikely to find them from that sector.
Cool. So Johan, as we're pressing up against time, I'm going to ask you the usual thing. I'm sure you about 50,000 questions you would like to ask. Do you have one or two questions you'd like to ask to bring this together for us?
As always, I have a few, but I'm going to touch back a little bit for what you just mentioned there as well, in terms of the journey and the digitalization and the digital native, because it's kind of words that sometimes are flown around a little bit, but then you apply that to kind of a legacy industry, it clashes a little bit. But out of curiosity, apart from your employees, have you seen from when you started the company and you went out for fundings and you pitched the idea or the software, maybe even a few years in versus now, is there a big difference between investors now in their kind of digital nativeness or their digital experience knowledge, but also in terms of investing in renewable? I'd assume it's a big difference because a lot of things
Yeah,
have happened in the last couple of years. But what would you say is the big thing?
yeah, there really is. And to use like a TV analogy, maybe it's overused because of the business model, but this is a more techie point in terms of how Netflix and other streaming services operate. Is the energy problem that was solved by technology used to be a static problem, right? Let's put a whole bunch of data in a cave. Let's let some clever people crunch on it for a day or a week or a month, and ta-da! Here's a solution. How you're going to build your hedging book for the next year, or how you're going to invest in the new asset that's going to be built and sweated for the next 20 years. So it was a static problem based on static data. And now we're moving to real-time streams of data. So if you look at that really big change, and that's fairly recent, right? That's since I founded the business, is the type of skills you need, the type of business model, and actually I think the fundamental offering looks more like a real-time streaming service, a bit like streaming a movie on your TV, as opposed to a static bunch of data that you kind of crunch through for a while and you come up with a ta-da kind of answer. So I think really that is a fundamental shift that I don't think even our early investors realized was going to be as fundamental as it was, is that they were really backing was an ability to deal with real-time streams of data that was relevant to different bits of the energy transition problem, and to be able to not just handle that real-time streaming, but to make sense of it, make real-time decisions on the back of it. So I think that's one of the really big shifts that we've seen even in the last 5 years. And it's, again, standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of other industries like entertainment, like streaming services. So really that is, I think, the new normal in energy, is you have to be able to handle real-time streams of data, make real-time decisions in the scale of seconds, minutes, hours, not just days and weeks and months. If you can't do that, you're dead. And I think that's really what the clever investors into this green energy transition are realizing, is if you're investing in an asset like a battery, it's going to make a lot of its money based on services measured in milliseconds and seconds, not just hours and minutes. If you're investing in a software company like Origami, it's going to have to handle real-time streams of data. So the whole real-time nature of the physical reality, of financial trading, of handling digital data streams is increasingly real-time. So it's a real-time solution for a dynamic problem. I think that's one of the biggest changes that's happened in the last 5 years.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time here. I think this conversation has been a lot of fun as an entrepreneur, as someone that works in the tech space and works at a software as a service company. So much of what was discussed just applies across the board. Doesn't matter where in the energy sector you are. If you're offering these kind of services, I think that was pretty able. I could generalize it to my current organization and a number of other newer companies in the industry that I can see that have that kind of same model and philosophy. So for me, it's been a fun journey. It'd be interesting to see how these 20-year contracts work out. 20 years from a startup is forever. So if you consider you guys still a startup, 20 years is forever. So in renewable energy, that puts us in a really different place. And I think, I don't know anyone's got the crystal ball that really knows where we're going to be 20 years out. So it'll be interesting to see how that journey goes. I want to thank you for joining us. It's been fantastic having you as a guest. Johan, any final thoughts from you?
No, thanks, Peter, for joining us. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was really interesting to see the analogy that you've ended off the show as well with, in terms of the understanding of real-time data. I think this is something that I think is really interesting. I like the business model as well, that we got that. And it's a combination of using the digital. We use the big D in terms of the digital transformation for energy. So great to hear. Thank you very much for joining.
It's my absolute pleasure. It's been fun, guys.
Well, thank you, Peter. And for our audience, you spent another hour listening to Insider's Guide to Energy. We hope you've enjoyed the conversations as much as we have. If you had, please share, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to hit the like button as well. We look forward to talking to you again next week. Bye-bye.